Welcome, weary traveller, to another journey with sleepless survivors. Tonight, we drift into the ancient mists of Mesopotamia, where the oldest stories ever written speak of beings who descended from the heavens. Close your eyes, settle into comfort, and let your mind wander through the corridors of time as we explore the mysteries of the Anunnaki, those enigmatic figures whose secrets may have shaped the very foundation of human civilization. Take a deep breath. Release the tensions of your day. Let the weight of your body sink deeper into rest as we begin this odyssey through forgotten histories and hidden truths. Chapter 1. The Dawn of Recorded History. In the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, approximately 5,000 years ago, humanity took its first steps toward recorded civilization. The Sumerians emerged as if from nowhere, bringing with them advanced knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and governance. Their sudden appearance has puzzled historians for generations. The Sumerians left behind thousands of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform writing, one of humanity's earliest scripts. These tablets speak of daily life, trade agreements, religious practices, and mythology. But woven throughout these ancient texts are references to beings called the Anunnaki, described as those who from heaven came to earth. The word Anunnaki itself derives from the Sumerian language, and means heaven or sky. Una means princely offspring, Ki refers to earth. Together the Anunnaki were understood as the princely offspring of heaven and earth, divine beings who bridge the cosmic realm and the terrestrial world. Let your breathing slow as we journey deeper into these ancient stories. Feel yourself drifting back through millennia to a time when the world was young and mysterious. The Sumerian creation myths describe a time before time, when only the primordial waters existed. From these waters emerged the first gods. Namu, the primeval sea, gave birth to An, the sky god, and Kai, the earth goddess. From their union came Enlil, god of air and storms, who separated heaven from earth, creating the space where life could flourish. But the gods needed workers. The lesser deities, known as the Igigi, toiled endlessly, digging canals, building cities, and maintaining the cosmic order. After 40 years of backbreaking labour, the Igigi rebelled. They surrounded Enlil's house, demanding relief from their eternal servitude. The gods convened a council. Enki, the god of wisdom and water, proposed a solution. He suggested creating a new being, a primitive worker who could take on the burdens of the gods. This being would be fashioned from clay and infused with the blood of a sacrificed god, creating humanity. According to the Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest creation stories ever discovered, Enki and the mother goddess Nintu worked together to fashion these first humans. They mixed clay with the blood of a slain god named Geshtue, whose essence contained intelligence and consciousness. From this divine mixture, humanity was born. Breathe slowly now. Let these ancient images fill your mind like dreams forming in the twilight between waking and sleep. The Anunnaki, according to these texts, numbered 600. 300 dwelt in heaven, and 300 walked the earth. They organized themselves into a divine hierarchy, with Anu, the supreme sky god, ruling from the celestial heights. Beneath him served the great gods, each with specific domains and responsibilities. Enlil commanded the winds and storms, holding dominion over the atmosphere and weather. His temple at Nippur served as the religious center of Sumer, where tablets describe him as the supreme authority on earth. Kings sought his blessing, and his word could elevate or destroy civilizations. Enki, brother of Enlil, governed the Absu, the freshwater depths beneath the earth. He was celebrated as humanity's greatest benefactor, the god who gave mortals the gifts of civilization: writing, mathematics, agriculture, and the arts. Enki appears repeatedly in Sumerian literature as a trickster figure, clever and compassionate, often defending humanity against the harsher judgments of his brother Enlil. Ninhursag, the mother goddess, presided over fertility, birth, and the nurturing of life. She assisted Enki in creating humanity and continued to watch over the welfare of her mortal children. Let your mind drift like clouds across an ancient sky as we explore these divine relationships and cosmic dramas. Chapter 2. The Tablets Speak. The evidence for the Anunnaki comes primarily from cuneiform tablets discovered across modern-day Iraq, Syria and Turkey. Thousands upon thousands of these clay documents have been excavated, translated, and studied by scholars over the past century and a half. Among the most significant discoveries are the tablets found in the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, ancient Assyria's great capital. King Ashurbanipal, who ruled in the 7th century BCE, assembled perhaps the ancient world's most comprehensive collection of literary and religious texts. When archaeologists excavated the ruins of his palace in the mid-1800s, they unearthed approximately 30,000 tablet fragments. These tablets preserved epic poems, mythological narratives, medical texts, astronomical observations, and administrative records spanning centuries of Mesopotamian civilization. Among them were copies of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest surviving great work of literature, and countless hymns and prayers to the Anunnaki gods. Feel yourself sinking deeper into rest as we turn the pages of these ancient books written in stone. The Enuma Elish, which means when on high in the Akkadian language, describes the creation of the cosmos through divine conflict. In the beginning, Apsu, the freshwater ocean, and Tiamat, the saltwater, sea, mingled their waters. From their union came the first gods, who were so noisy and disruptive that Apsu decided to destroy them. Learning of this plot, the young god Ea, known as Enki in Sumerian, cast a spell that put Apsu into a deep sleep, then killed him. Tiamat, enraged by her consort's murder, transformed into a dragon and created an army of monsters to avenge Apsu and destroy the younger gods. The gods trembled in fear until Marduk, son of Ea, agreed to champion their cause. Marduk defeated Tiamat in single combat, splitting her body in half. From one half he created the sky, from the other the earth. He established the stars in their courses, organized the calendar, and created humanity from the blood of King, Tiamat's second consort, mixing it with clay to fashion mortal beings who would serve the gods. This violent creation narrative reflects a common theme in ancient Near Eastern mythology. The world emerges from chaos through divine struggle, and humanity's purpose is to serve the divine order. Let these cosmic battles fade into the background of your consciousness as you drift toward deeper realms of rest. The Epic of Gilgamesh offers another perspective on the Anunnaki and their relationship with humanity. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, was described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, a demigod of tremendous strength and ambition. His story explores themes of friendship, mortality, and the human quest for immortality. In the epic, Gilgamesh encounters various Anunnaki gods who influence his destiny. The goddess Ishtar, deity of love and war, propositions Gilgamesh, but he rejects her, knowing her history of destroying her lovers. Enraged, Ishtar persuades her father Anu to send the Bull of Heaven to destroy Uruk. Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu slay the divine bull, an act of hubris that brings divine punishment. The gods decree that Enkidu must die for killing the Bull of Heaven. Gilgamesh, devastated by his friend's death, becomes obsessed with escaping mortality. He journeys to find Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah, who survived a great flood and was granted immortality by the gods. Breathe slowly, deeply, as we follow Gilgamesh on his impossible quest. Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh the story of the deluge, how Enlil decided to destroy humanity with a catastrophic flood. Enki, defying the divine decree, warned Utnapishtim by speaking to the wall of his reed house, instructing him to build a great boat and save his family, along with the seed of all living creatures. The flood came, terrible and absolute. For 6 days and 7 nights, the storm raged, covering the earth with water. Even the Anunnaki gods were terrified by the destruction they had unleashed. The goddess Ishtar wept, lamenting that she had agreed to this catastrophe. When the waters receded, the boat came to rest on a mountain. Utnapishtim released first a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven. The raven did not return, indicating that dry land had emerged. Utnapishtim made offerings to the gods, who, smelling the sweet savour of sacrifice, gathered like flies around the altar, grateful that humanity had not been completely destroyed. Enlil, discovering that Utnapishtim had survived, was furious that his decree had been thwarted, but Enki convinced the assembly that complete destruction had been too harsh a punishment. Enlil relented, touched Utnapishtim and his wife, and granted them immortality, removing them from the mortal world to dwell at the mouth of the rivers. let the sound of ancient waters wash over your consciousness, carrying you toward the shores of sleep. Chapter 3. The Anunnaki Pantheon. The Anunnaki formed a complex divine hierarchy, reflecting the sophisticated social structures of ancient Mesopotamian civilization. At the apex stood Anu, the remote sky god, father of the gods, whose authority was absolute but whose direct intervention in earthly affairs was rare. Anu dwelt in the highest heaven, in a celestial palace of lapis lazuli and gold. Kings claimed their authority descended from Anu, and the most sacred religious sites were dedicated to his worship. Yet Anu remains a somewhat distant figure in the mythological texts, a source of ultimate authority who delegated most practical governance to his children. Enlil, Anu's firstborn son, held the Tablet of Destinies, which granted him power over fate itself. His temple in Nippur, called the Ekkur, or Mountain House, served as the central meeting place of the divine assembly. When the gods gathered to make decisions affecting the cosmos, they convened before Enlil. Enlil was not always benevolent. The flood myth portrays him as harsh and quick to anger, willing to destroy all humanity for disturbing his rest with their noise. Yet he was also recognized as the bringer of civilization, the god who bestowed kingship upon mortals and established the cosmic order that allowed cities to flourish. Feel your body growing heavier, your thoughts becoming softer and less defined, like clouds dissolving into mist. Enki presents a fascinating contrast to his brother Enlil. Where Enlil represented law, order, and sometimes harsh justice, Enki embodied wisdom, creativity, and compassion. The myths consistently portray Enki as humanity's advocate and protector. Enki's domain was the Abzu, the subterranean freshwater ocean that the Sumerians believed fed all springs, wells, and rivers. His city was Eridu, considered the oldest city in the world, where his temple stood at the edge of the marshes. Archaeological excavations at Eridu have revealed continuous occupation dating back to the 6th millennium BCE, making it one of humanity's earliest urban settlements. The Sumerian text called Enki and the World Order describes how Enki travelled throughout the land, establishing civilization's foundations. He filled the Tigris and Euphrates rivers with water. He placed fish in the sea and established marshlands where birds could nest. He appointed deities to oversee grain, herds, agriculture, and crafts. He gave humanity the arts of building, writing, and mathematics. In another myth, Enki and Ninhursag, Enki creates various beings to serve specific functions in the cosmic order. The text describes his creative experiments, some successful, some flawed, all reflecting the Mesopotamian understanding that the gods were still learning and adapting as they shaped the world. Let these images of divine creativity flow through your relaxing mind like a gentle stream. The goddess Inanna, known as Ishtar in Akkadian, represents one of the most complex and powerful deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon. She embodied seemingly contradictory domains: love and warfare, fertility and destruction, the morning and evening star. The descent of Inanna tells of her journey to the underworld, realm of her sister Ereshkigal. Inanna descended through 7 gates, at each removing a piece of her divine regalia until she stood naked and powerless before the throne of the underworld. Ereshkigal killed her sister and hung her corpse on a hook. For 3 days, Inanna remained in the land of the dead while the world above withered without her presence. Finally, through Enki's intervention, Inanna was resurrected and returned to the world of the living. However, she could not leave the underworld permanently empty-handed. She was required to send a substitute to take her place. Inanna found her husband Dumuzi sitting proudly on a throne, apparently unconcerned about her ordeal. Enraged, she designated him as her replacement. Dumuzi fled but was eventually captured by demons and dragged to the underworld. His sister Geshtinana volunteered to share his fate, and so it was decreed that they would alternate, each spending half the year in the realm of the dead. This myth provided the Mesopotamian explanation for the agricultural cycle, the seasons of growth and harvest alternating with periods of dormancy and death. Feel yourself descending like Inanna, layer by layer, deeper into peaceful darkness where rest awaits. Chapter 4. The Function of the Gods. The Anunnaki were not merely objects of worship, but active participants in the daily life of Mesopotamian civilization. Each major city had its patron deity, whose temple formed the economic and administrative center of urban life. In Babylon, Marduk reigned supreme. His temple, the Esagila, dominated the city's sacred precinct, while the great ziggurat Enki, believed by some scholars to have inspired the biblical Tower of Babel, rose beside it. During the annual New Year festival, the Enuma Elish was recited, and the king underwent ritual humiliation and renewal, grasping the hands of Marduk's statue to receive another year of divine sanction for his rule. In Uruk, Inanna held sway from her temple called the Iana, the House of Heaven. Archaeological excavations have revealed that this temple complex was continuously rebuilt and enlarged for thousands of years, reflecting Uruk's wealth and Inanna's importance to the city's identity. Ur, one of Mesopotamia's greatest cities, honoured Nanna, the moon god, whose ziggurat still stands today, a testament to ancient architectural ambition. The moon held special significance in Mesopotamian religion, as its phases provided a reliable calendar for agricultural and religious observance. Let your awareness of time slip away as we explore these timeless sacred spaces. The ziggurats themselves deserve attention, these massive stepped pyramids that dominated the Mesopotamian landscape. Unlike Egyptian pyramids, which served as tombs, ziggurats functioned as artificial mountains, lifting the temple toward heaven and providing a meeting place between the divine and mortal realms. Each ziggurat had a temple at its summit where the god was believed to descend from heaven to receive worship and offerings. Priests climbed the long staircases multiple times daily, bringing food, wine, and incense to nourish the deity. The god's statue would be washed, dressed in fine garments, and presented with elaborate meals. This ritual feeding of the gods reflects the fundamental Mesopotamian understanding of the divine-human relationship. The gods had created humanity to serve them, to maintain the temples, to provide offerings, and to perform the rituals that sustained cosmic order. In return, the gods protected the cities, ensured good harvests, granted victory in war, and mediated between human concerns and the vast impersonal forces of nature. The concept of me, a Sumerian word meaning divine decree or fundamental power, helps illuminate how the Mesopotamians understood reality itself. The me were the essential components of civilization and cosmic order: kingship, priesthood, truth, falsehood, art, music, sexual intercourse, judgment, writing, craftsmanship, and hundreds more. These me belong to the gods, particularly Enki, who safeguarded them in his city Eridu. In the myth Inanna and Enki, the goddess Inanna travels to Eridu and cleverly gets Enki drunk. While intoxicated, Enki gives Inanna all the me, transferring the powers of civilization from Eridu to her city Uruk. When Enki sobers and realizes what he has done, he sends demons to retrieve the me, but Inanna successfully defends her prize. This myth reflects both intercity rivalry and the Mesopotamian belief that civilization's foundations were divine gifts that could be transferred or lost. Breathe in the wisdom of ages. Breathe out the concerns of the present moment. Sink deeper. Chapter 5. The Watchers and the Nephilim. The story of the Anunnaki shares intriguing parallels with other ancient Near Eastern traditions, particularly the biblical narrative of the Watchers and Nephilim found in Genesis, and expanded in texts like the Book of Enoch. Genesis chapter 6 contains one of the Bible's most enigmatic passages. It describes how the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and took wives from among them. From these unions were born the Nephilim, described as mighty men of old, men of renown. This brief account has generated centuries of theological debate and interpretation. Who were these sons of God? The Hebrew phrase B'nai Elohim can be translated as divine beings, gods, or angels. Traditional Jewish and early Christian interpretation understood them as fallen angels who descended to earth, became enamored with human women, and produced hybrid offspring. The Book of Enoch, a text that was widely read in early Judaism and Christianity, but eventually excluded from most biblical canons, greatly expands this narrative. It names the leaders of the Watchers: Semjaza, Azazel, Amaros, and others. 200 Watchers descended to Mount Hermon, where they swore an oath to proceed with their plan despite knowing it violated divine law. Let your mind wander through these mysterious connections between ancient traditions. The Watchers took human wives and taught humanity forbidden knowledge. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and armour, introducing warfare. Others taught the arts of cosmetics and jewellery, enchantments and astrology, the cutting of roots and plants for medicine and poison. The Nephilim born from these unions grew into giants who consumed all of humanity's resources, then began to devour humans themselves. Violence and corruption spread across the earth until God decided that a great flood must cleanse the world. The parallels with Anunnaki mythology are striking. Both traditions describe divine beings descending from heaven to earth. Both involve these beings interacting intimately with humanity, producing offspring, and teaching advanced knowledge. Both narratives culminate in a catastrophic flood that nearly destroys all life. Scholars have long recognized that the biblical flood narrative shares clear literary connections with earlier Mesopotamian flood myths, like those found in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic. The Genesis flood story likely represents a Hebrew adaptation of older Mesopotamian traditions, adjusted to fit monotheistic theology. Some researchers have suggested that the Anunnaki and the Watchers may represent different cultural memories of the same events or beings. This hypothesis proposes that ancient peoples experienced encounters with advanced entities, whether divine, extraterrestrial, or something else entirely, and each culture interpreted and recorded these encounters through their own religious and mythological frameworks. Feel yourself floating in the space between these ancient stories, where boundaries blur and mysteries deepen. The biblical text states that the Nephilim existed in those days, and also afterward. This phrase has puzzled interpreters because it suggests the Nephilim somehow survived the flood, or were somehow recreated. Later biblical passages describe giants living in Canaan when the Israelites arrived, the Anakim, the Rephaim, and individuals like Goliath, who stood over 9 feet tall. Could these post-flood giants represent a continuation of the Nephilim bloodline? Mesopotamian texts similarly describe hybrid beings and unusual creatures continuing to exist in the post-flood world. The boundary between divine and mortal in ancient thinking was more permeable than later theological systems would allow. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the mid-20th century, contain fragmentary texts that expand on the Watcher tradition. The Book of Giants, preserved in Aramaic fragments found at Qumran, describes the Nephilim giants experiencing prophetic dreams warning them of the coming flood. The giants are portrayed not merely as violent monsters but as tragic figures, aware of their doom yet unable to escape it. One fragment describes how 2 giants, Ohia and Hahia, have dreams of a great forest being destroyed. They consult Enoch, the righteous man who walked with God, to interpret their visions. Enoch confirms that the dreams foretell a devastating flood that will destroy them and cleanse the earth of the corruption their existence represents. Let these ancient tragedies drift through your consciousness like shadows passing across the moon. Chapter 6. Ancient Astronaut Theories. In the mid-20th century, a new interpretation of the Anunnaki emerged, one that departed dramatically from traditional religious and scholarly understandings. This perspective, often called the Ancient Astronaut Theory, proposed that the Anunnaki were not gods or mythological beings, but extraterrestrial visitors who came to Earth in humanity's distant past. The most prominent advocate of this interpretation was Zecharia Sitchin, a Russian-born American author who published a series of books beginning with The 12th Planet in 1976. Sitchin claimed to have translated ancient Sumerian texts and discovered evidence that the Anunnaki were alien beings from a planet called Nibiru, which supposedly follows a 3,600-year elliptical orbit around the Sun. According to Sitchin's interpretation, the Anunnaki came to Earth approximately 450,000 years ago in search of gold, which they needed to repair their planet's deteriorating atmosphere. They established mining operations in southern Africa and Mesopotamia, initially doing the work themselves. Eventually, the Anunnaki workers rebelled against the harsh conditions, leading to the creation of humans through genetic engineering, mixing Anunnaki DNA with that of primitive hominids to create a slave species capable of working the mines. Breathe slowly as we explore this controversial interpretation, neither endorsing nor dismissing, but simply observing. Sitchin pointed to various pieces of evidence to support his thesis. He argued that the sudden appearance of Sumerian civilization, with its sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture, suggested intervention by an advanced external intelligence. He interpreted certain Sumerian cylinder seals as depicting the solar system, including planets that were not discovered until modern times. He also proposed that ancient structures like the pyramids of Egypt, the megalithic temples of Malta, and the ruins of Tiahuanaco in Bolivia could not have been built with the technology available to ancient peoples, suggesting Anunnaki engineering and construction. Academic scholars have overwhelmingly rejected Sitchin's theories, pointing out numerous flaws in his translations of Sumerian texts and his interpretation of archaeological evidence. Professional Sumerologists note that Sitchin's renderings of cuneiform texts often bear little resemblance to what the tablets actually say. His proposed planet Nibiru lacks any astronomical evidence for its existence. Nevertheless, Sitchin's work captured popular imagination and spawned a genre of ancient astronaut literature that continues to influence how many people think about ancient history and mythology. Let yourself remain curious but discerning as we consider different perspectives on ancient mysteries. Other authors expanded on similar themes. Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods, published in 1968, predated Sitchin but explored similar ideas about ancient astronaut visitations. Von Däniken pointed to various ancient artworks and structures as evidence of extraterrestrial contact, though his interpretations often relied more on speculation than rigorous analysis. The ancient astronaut hypothesis raises interesting questions about how we interpret ancient texts and artifacts. When ancient peoples described gods descending from heaven in fiery chariots, were they using the only language available to describe encounters with advanced technology? Or were they expressing genuine religious experiences and mythological imagination in culturally appropriate terms? The archaeologist and historian dismiss most ancient astronaut claims as pseudoscientific, arguing that they underestimate the ingenuity and capabilities of ancient peoples while imposing modern technological frameworks onto cultures that thought very differently about reality, causation, and the divine. Moreover, the ancient astronaut narrative can be seen as problematically Eurocentric or Western-centric, suggesting that non-European civilizations could not have achieved their accomplishments without external intervention. This perspective echoes colonial-era attitudes that denied agency and innovation to indigenous peoples. Yet the questions raised by these theories continue to fascinate. How did ancient peoples acquire sophisticated astronomical knowledge? Why do flood myths appear in cultures around the world? What explains the remarkable architectural achievements of antiquity? Float peacefully on these questions without needing to grasp for definitive answers. Mystery can be restful. Chapter 7. The Anunnaki and Human Origins. Returning to the ancient texts themselves, we find a consistent theme. The Anunnaki played a central role in creating or shaping humanity. Multiple Mesopotamian creation accounts describe this divine intervention in the emergence of human beings. The Enuma Elish states that Marduk created humanity from the blood of Kingu, the defeated adversary of the gods. The Atrahasis epic describes how Enki and the birth goddess Nintu fashioned humans from clay mixed with the flesh and blood of a slain god named Gesh-Tu'e, whose name means intelligence. This sacrificial element in human creation is significant. Humanity was not merely shaped from inert matter, but infused with divine essence, giving humans consciousness, intelligence, and a connection to the divine realm. The blood of Gesh-Tu'e carried his intelligence and understanding into the newly created beings. The Sumerian text Ka-Phos describes the creation process in detail. Nintu pinched off 14 pieces of clay. 7 she formed into males, 7 into females. The clay figures were placed in a special room and kept in seclusion for 9 days, mirroring the period of human gestation. On the 10th day, Nintu opened the seals and revealed the first human beings. Drift deeper as we contemplate these ancient understandings of human origins. Another creation text describes how the first humans emerged from the ground like grass, lacking the knowledge necessary for civilized life. Enki took pity on these primitive creatures and gave them the gifts that would distinguish humans from animals: language, agriculture, the arts of building and craftsmanship, and most importantly, the ability to worship the gods properly. This theme of divine tutelage appears throughout Mesopotamian literature. The Adapa myth tells of a wise man whom Enki created and endowed with supreme intelligence but denied immortality. When Adapa accidentally broke the south wind's wing while fishing, he was summoned to heaven to answer for his offence. Enki warned Adapa not to eat or drink anything offered to him in heaven, advice intended to protect him from poisoning. However, the gods Anu and Enlil were impressed by Adapa's wisdom and offered him the bread and water of life, which would have granted him immortality. Following Enki's instructions, Adapa refused, unknowingly turning down the very gift that would have made him equal to the gods. When the truth was revealed, Anu laughed at the irony and sent Adapa back to Earth, doomed to mortality despite his divine wisdom. This story reflects the Mesopotamian understanding that humans occupied a liminal space between the animal and divine realms. We possessed godlike intelligence and consciousness, but remained bound by mortality and the needs of the flesh. Let your own consciousness drift between waking and sleeping, between thought and dream. The Epic of Atrahasis provides perhaps the most detailed account of humanity's creation and early relationship with the Anunnaki. The text begins by describing how the gods drew lots to divide the cosmos among themselves. Anu received the sky, Enlil the earth, and Enki the waters beneath the earth. The Igigi gods, lesser divine beings, were assigned to dig the canals and perform the labour necessary to make the earth productive. For 40 years they toiled, digging the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and establishing irrigation systems. Their work was backbreaking, and gradually resentment grew. Finally, the Igigi rebelled. They burned their tools, set fire to their baskets, and marched on Enlil's house in the middle of the night. The text describes their fury vividly. Every single one of us gods declared war. We have put a stop to the digging. The load is excessive. It is killing us. The gods convened a council to address the crisis. Enki proposed the solution: create a substitute worker to bear the burden of the gods. The birth goddess Nintu would fashion this new being from clay mixed with divine blood, creating a creature that combined earthly substance with celestial consciousness. Breathe in the ancient air of that divine council. Breathe out into peaceful darkness. Chapter 8. The relationship between gods and humans. The Mesopotamian understanding of the divine-human relationship differed significantly from later religious traditions. The gods were not portrayed as morally perfect beings who loved humanity unconditionally. Rather, they were powerful entities with their own needs, desires, conflicts, and limitations. Humans existed to serve divine needs. The gods required food, clothing, shelter, and worship, all of which humanity provided through temple service and offerings. In return, the gods maintained cosmic order, protected cities from enemies, and ensured agricultural fertility. This relationship was essentially transactional, rather than based on love or grace. A Sumerian proverb states, "Man is the shadow of a god, a slave is the shadow of a man, but the king is the mirror of a god." This hierarchy positioned humanity firmly beneath the divine, but also acknowledged that some humans, particularly kings, could approach divine status. The concept of Namlu U17 Lu, meaning humanity or humankind, emphasized the collective nature of the human condition. Individuals mattered less than the continuation of the species and the proper functioning of the human role within the cosmic order. Yet the texts also revealed genuine affection between certain gods and their human subjects. Enki repeatedly protected humanity from Enlil's harsher judgments. The goddess Ninsun deeply loved her son Gilgamesh, interceding with the gods on his behalf. Local city gods developed protective relationships with their urban populations. Let these complex relationships blur and soften in your drowsy mind. Prayer and ritual formed the primary means of communication between humans and gods. Thousands of Sumerian hymns and prayers survive on clay tablets, revealing how ordinary people addressed their deities. These prayers often follow a similar pattern, praising the god's greatness and power, describing the supplicant's suffering or need, and requesting divine intervention. A prayer to the moon, god Nana reads, "O Nana, Lord of gods, whose penetrating gaze covers all lands, who shines brightly in heaven, you who determine the destiny of all creatures, I have called upon you in my distress." The prayer continues by detailing specific troubles and pleading for relief. Dream oracles provided another form of divine communication. Gudea, a ruler of Lagash around 2100 BCE, described receiving detailed architectural plans for a temple through a dream sent by the god Ninhursag. The dream was so complex that Gudea consulted a dream priestess to help interpret it fully. Divination took many forms in Mesopotamia, reading the organs of sacrificed animals, observing oil patterns on water, interpreting celestial phenomena, and analysing patterns in smoke or incense. The gods communicated their will through signs embedded in nature, and skilled priests learned to read these signs. The Anunnaki were believed to gather regularly in divine assembly to decide matters of cosmic importance. These assemblies, often convened by Enlil at his temple in Nippur, determined the fate of nations, the outcomes of wars, and occasionally the destiny of all humanity, as in the decision to send the flood. Float gently in the space between worlds where such assemblies might convene. Chapter 9. The Great Flood and its Aftermath. The flood narrative appears with remarkable consistency across multiple Mesopotamian texts, suggesting it held special importance in the cultural memory of the region. The story appears in Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian versions, each preserving core elements while varying in details. The earliest known version appears in the fragmentary Sumerian poem Eridu Genesis, dating to approximately 1600 BCE, but likely preserving older traditions. In this version, the pious king Ziusudra receives warning of the coming flood and builds a great boat to preserve life. The Atrahasis epic, dating to the Old Babylonian period around 1800 BCE, provides more extensive detail. The text explains that humanity had multiplied and spread across the earth. The noise of human civilization disturbed Enlil's rest, and in his irritation, he decided to reduce the human population. First, Enlil sent plague, but Enki advised humanity to stop worshipping other gods and focus all offerings on Namtar, the plague god, who responded by lifting the disease. Next, Enlil brought drought, and again Enki found a solution, instructing humanity to concentrate offerings on Adad, the storm god, who sent rain. Frustrated by these circumventions, Enlil demanded that all the gods swear an oath not to warn humanity about his final plan, a catastrophic flood that would destroy all human life. The gods agreed, but Enki, bound by his oath not to speak directly to any human, found a clever loophole. Let the sound of rising waters fill your consciousness as sleep approaches. Enki went to the house of Atrahasis, whose name means exceedingly wise, and spoke to the reed wall rather than to the man himself. Reed wall, wall, pay attention, Enki said. He then described the coming flood and gave detailed instructions for building a boat, its dimensions, its waterproofing with bitumen, the need to bring aboard his family and representatives of all living creatures. Atrahasis followed these instructions precisely, though his neighbours mocked him for building an enormous boat far from the river. When the flood began, its violence exceeded even what the gods had anticipated. The Atrahasis text describes their terror. The gods were frightened by the deluge. They withdrew, went up to the heaven of Anu. The gods cowered like dogs crouching outside. For 7 days and 7 nights the storm raged. When it finally ceased, silence fell over a world covered entirely by water. Atrahasis opened a window and wept, seeing nothing but endless ocean in all directions. Eventually the boat grounded on a mountain. Atrahasis released birds to test for dry land, first a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven. When the raven did not return, Atrahasis knew that land had emerged from the waters. He left the boat and made offerings to the gods. The deities, who had been without offerings for the duration of the flood and were desperate for food, gathered like flies around the sacrifice, drift on these ancient waters toward the peaceful shore of sleep. Enlil arrived and was furious to discover that humans had survived his attempt at complete destruction. But Enki defended his actions, arguing that wholesale destruction was unjust. He proposed instead that the gods should control human population through natural means: infant mortality, infertility in some women, and demons that snatch away children. This compromise restored balance. Humanity would continue but in limited numbers, preventing the overpopulation that had led to the crisis. The gods learned that they needed humanity's service, and could not simply destroy their workers when inconvenienced. The Epic of Gilgamesh presents a similar narrative in the context of Gilgamesh's quest for immortality. Utnapishtim, the flood survivor in this version, explains to Gilgamesh how he gained eternal life not through his own merit, but by the grace of the gods after surviving the deluge. Utnapishtim describes the decision to send the flood as made in secret. The hearts of the great gods moved them to inflict the flood. Ea, the Akkadian name for Enki, warned Utnapishtim through the same clever stratagem, speaking to the reed wall of his house. The storm in Gilgamesh is described with vivid poetry. The wide land was shattered like a pot. For one day the south storm blew, gathering speed as it blew, submerging the mountains, overtaking the people like a battle. No one could see his fellow. They could not recognize each other in the torrent. Even the gods regretted their decision. Ishtar cried out like a woman in childbirth. The old days have turned to clay because I spoke evil in the assembly of the gods. How could I speak evil in the assembly of the gods, ordering a catastrophe to destroy my people? Let these divine laments echo softly in your mind as you slip deeper into rest. Chapter 10. Cities of the Gods. The sacred geography of ancient Mesopotamia was organized around the principal cities, where the great Anunnaki established their temples and held dominion. These cities were not merely human settlements, but were understood as the earthly estates of specific deities. Eridu, perhaps the oldest of all Sumerian cities, belonged to Enki. Located in the far south near the marshy edge of the Persian Gulf, Eridu represented the boundary between the ordered world and the primeval waters of the Abzu. Archaeological excavations have revealed 17 successive temple platforms at Eridu, suggesting continuous sacred use stretching back to the Ubaid period, around 5400 BCE. Sumerian tradition held that kingship first descended from heaven at Eridu, making it the original centre of civilization. The city's location at the interface of fresh and salt waters gave it special significance, as these waters were associated with creation, fertility, and Enki's domain. Nippur, the city of Enlil, held a unique status in Mesopotamian civilization. Unlike other major cities, Nippur never served as a political capital. Its importance was purely religious. Whoever controlled Nippur and received Enlil's blessing in his temple, the Eka, was recognized as the legitimate ruler of Sumer and, later, of Babylonia. The Eka, whose name means mountain house, was considered the Axis Mundi, the cosmic center where heaven and earth connected. Enlil's temple complex dominated Nippur's sacred precinct, and pilgrims came from across Mesopotamia to worship there and seek divine favor. Let your mind wander through these ancient sacred spaces, where the boundary between earth and heaven grew thin. Uruk, the city of Inanna and Anu, stands as one of ancient history's most remarkable urban centers. At its height around 2900 BCE, Uruk may have housed up to 80,000 people, making it the largest city in the world at that time. The city's walls, said to have been built by Gilgamesh himself, stretched for nearly 6 miles. 2 great temple complexes dominated Uruk, the Eanna, dedicated to Inanna, and the Temple of Anu, the sky god. The Eanna precinct has yielded some of the earliest examples of monumental architecture and the oldest known writing, suggesting that Uruk played a crucial role in the development of both architectural sophistication and written language. The White Temple of Anu stood atop a massive platform, rising above the city like an artificial mountain. Its walls were whitewashed limestone, gleaming in the Mesopotamian sun, visible for miles across the flat river plain. Priests climbed the long staircase multiple times daily to tend to Anu's needs, though the sky god himself remained remote, dwelling in the highest heaven. Ur, the city of the moon god Nanna, rose to prominence in the 3rd millennium BCE. The 3rd dynasty of Ur, around 2100 BCE, represents one of the high points of Sumerian civilization, when art, literature and architecture flourished under royal patronage. The ziggurat of Ur, built by King Ur-Nammu, still stands today, though heavily reconstructed. This massive stepped pyramid originally rose in 3 stages to a height of over 70 feet, with a shrine to Nanna at its summit. The ziggurat's base covers approximately 45,000 square feet, demonstrating the enormous resources devoted to honouring the gods. Float peacefully through these ancient streets, where gods and humans dwelt in close proximity. Babylon, though a relative latecomer to Mesopotamian history, eventually became the greatest city of the region and the centre of a vast empire. Babylon was the city of Marduk and the Enuma Elish, which elevated Marduk to supremacy over all other gods, reflects Babylon's political and religious ambitions. The Ishtar Gate, one of the wonders of the ancient world, welcomed visitors into Babylon through a tunnel of blue-glazed brick decorated with golden bulls and dragons. The processional way led from the gate to the Esagila, Marduk's temple, and the great ziggurat at Temenanki, whose name means the foundation of heaven and earth. Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Babylon in the 5th century BCE, described the ziggurat as rising in 8 stages to an immense height, though scholars debate whether his account is entirely accurate. He claimed that a shrine at the summit contained a great golden couch, where a woman chosen by the god would spend the night, awaiting Marduk's visitation. The New Year festival at Babylon, called the Akitu, was one of the most important religious celebrations in the ancient Near East. During this 12-day festival, the Enuma Elish was recited, the king underwent ritual humiliation and renewal, and Marduk's statue was paraded through the streets. The festival celebrated the renewal of cosmic order, the reaffirmation of kingship, and the defeat of chaos. Let the magnificence of these ancient ceremonial spaces fill your imagination as your conscious thoughts dissolve. Chapter 11. The Me's Divine Powers of Civilization. The concept of Me, those divine decrees or fundamental powers that governed all aspects of existence, provides crucial insight into how the Mesopotamians understood reality, civilization, and the gods' relationship with humanity. The Me were not merely abstract principles, but were understood as concrete powers that could be possessed, transferred, or stolen. A deity who held many Me was more powerful and influential than one who held few. The distribution of Me among the gods reflected the cosmic hierarchy and the specific domains each deity controlled. Enki, as the god of wisdom, originally possessed most of the Me, safeguarding them in his city Eridu. Various myths describe how other gods acquired Me through gift, theft, or trickery. The most famous such story is preserved in the Sumerian poem Inanna and Enki. Young Inanna desired to increase her power and importance, so she travelled to Eridu to visit her father Enki. Enki received her warmly and ordered his servant to prepare a feast with abundant beer and wine. As they drank together, Enki, growing increasingly intoxicated, began giving Inanna various Me. Let your mind drift through this divine banquet where the foundations of civilization changed hands. He gave her lordship, divinity, and the noble crown. He gave her the throne of kingship, the exalted sceptre, and the noble staff. He gave her shepherdship of the land and kingship. He gave her truth and the art of speech. Then he gave her the art of love-making, the kissing of the phallus, prostitution, and the various expressions of human sexuality. Enki continued, giving Inanna the arts of music and song, the crafts of metalworking and leatherworking, building and woodworking, basket weaving and reed working. He gave her wisdom and understanding, judgment and decision-making. He gave her destruction of cities, lamentation, and the art of being a public hero. He gave her both kindness and treachery, the straightforward way and the crooked way. In all, texts indicate that Enki gave Inanna over 100 Emi, essentially transferring the foundations of civilization from his control to hers. When Enki sobered and realized what he had done, he sent demons to retrieve the Me before Inanna could reach her city of Uruk. But Inanna's vizier, Ninhursag, helped her defend the Me against each wave of demons. Every time Enki sent servants to reclaim the divine powers, Ninhursag repelled them. Eventually Inanna successfully transported the Me to Uruk, and Enki had to accept the permanent transfer. This myth reflects several important aspects of Mesopotamian thought. First, it demonstrates that the gods were not all-knowing or all-powerful. Enki could make mistakes, act rashly when drunk, and fail in his attempts to correct those mistakes. Second, the transfer of Me from Eridu to Uruk mirrors the historical shift in political and economic power as different cities rose and fell in prominence. Third, the story validates Uruk's claim to be a centre of civilization, and Inanna's status as one of the most important deities in the pantheon. Drift deeper into sleep as these divine powers flow like water through the ancient world. Chapter 12. The Kings and the Gods. Mesopotamian kingship was understood as divinely ordained and mediated. Kings did not rule by their own power, but as representatives and servants of the gods. The king's primary duty was to maintain cosmic order, ensure proper worship, defend the cities from enemies, and administer justice. The concept that kingship descended from heaven appears in the Sumerian king list, a text that attempts to provide a comprehensive chronology of all legitimate rulers from the beginning of time to the present. The list begins, after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. The list then proceeds through a series of antediluvian kings who ruled for impossibly long periods, tens of thousands of years in some cases. After the flood, the list continues with dynasties ruling in various cities, though the reign lengths become more realistic. Scholars recognise that the king list blends mythology with genuine historical memory, making it challenging to determine where legend ends and history begins. kings portrayed themselves as chosen by specific gods. Hammurabi, the Babylonian king famous for his law code, claimed that Marduk had commissioned him to cause justice to prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, that the strong might not oppress the weak. Royal inscriptions regularly describe how gods granted kings victory in battle. A typical formula might read, "When Inanna, Lady of Combat, who grants me victory in battle, gave me the terrible splendour of kingship, I defeated the armies of the enemy lands." Let these ancient affirmations of divine authority echo softly in your restful mind. The relationship between king and god was ritualized through elaborate ceremonies. In Babylon, the New Year festival included a remarkable scene where the high priest of Marduk would strike the king across the face, pull his ears, and force him to kneel before the statue of Marduk. The king would then recite a negative confession, declaring that he had not sinned, not neglected the city or temple, and not struck the cheek of a subordinate. The priest would then bless the king and return his royal insignia, symbolically renewing his mandate to rule for another year. This ritual humiliation emphasized that the king's authority derived not from personal power, but from divine sanction that required constant renewal. Kings served as intermediaries between gods and people, responsible for maintaining the temples, ensuring that proper offerings were made, and building or restoring sacred structures. A king who neglected these duties invited divine wrath, which might manifest as military defeat, famine, plague, or natural disasters. Conversely, military success and prosperity were interpreted as signs of divine favour. When Sargon of Akkad conquered all of Sumer around 2334 BCE, creating history's first empire, his success was attributed to the support of Inanna, who had chosen him despite his humble origins. The famous legend of Sargon's birth describes how his mother, a high priestess forbidden to bear children, placed him in a basket of rushes and set him adrift on the Euphrates River. A gardener found and raised the child, who eventually became cupbearer to the king of Kish. Inanna looked upon Sargon with favour, granting him kingship and empire. This story, which may have influenced the biblical account of Moses' birth, illustrates the Mesopotamian belief that the gods could elevate anyone to power, regardless of birth status, if it suited their purposes. Float peacefully on those ancient waters where babies in baskets drift toward divine destiny. Chapter 13. Death and the Afterlife. Mesopotamian beliefs about death and the afterlife present a stark contrast to the hopeful visions found in later religious traditions. The Sumerian and Babylonian view of death was generally bleak. All humans, regardless of status or virtue, descended to the same dark underworld after death. This realm was called Irkala, or Kur, a land of no return located beneath the earth. It was ruled by Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, and her consort Nergal, god of death and plague. The dead existed as Giddim, ghosts or shades, dwelling in darkness and eating dust. The descent of Inanna describes the underworld in vivid detail. To enter, one must pass through 7 gates, at each removing items of power and protection, until arriving completely vulnerable before Ereshkigal's throne. The text describes the underworld's inhabitants as clothed like birds in feather garments, dwelling in a place where light never reaches. The Epic of Gilgamesh includes a powerful scene where the ghost of Enkidu returns from the underworld to describe it to his friend. Gilgamesh asks if Enkidu has seen various categories of the dead, and each time Enkidu responds with grim news. Those with many sons receive slightly better treatment, but even they exist in a diminished state. Those who died without proper burial suffer worst of all, finding no rest and receiving no offerings from the living. Let these shadows of mortality drift through your consciousness like smoke dissolving into darkness. Proper burial and continued offerings from the living were essential for the dead's welfare. Families maintained obligations to deceased relatives, pouring libations and presenting food offerings at regular intervals. Neglecting these duties could cause the ghost to become restless and return to haunt the living. The concept of Ilu Limni, evil gods or demons, included both malevolent deities and dangerous ghosts who had not received proper care. These entities could attack the living, causing illness, misfortune, and death. Protection came through amulets, incantations, and rituals performed by priests. Despite the generally pessimistic view of the afterlife, a few exceptional humans escaped ordinary death. Utnapishtim and his wife received immortality as a reward for surviving the flood. Adapa was offered immortality but foolishly refused it. Etana, an ancient king, flew to heaven on an eagle's back in search of the plant of birth that would give his wife a child. The myth of Etana illustrates humanity's longing to transcend mortality. Etana befriends an eagle trapped in a pit by a serpent. After Etana rescues the eagle, it offers to carry him to heaven. They ascend through 3 levels of heaven, but just as they approach Ishtar's realm where the plant of birth grows, Etana looks down, becomes terrified of the height, and falls back to earth. Different versions of the myth disagree on whether he survives the fall. These stories reflect the Mesopotamian understanding that immortality belonged to the gods alone. Humans might briefly approach the divine realm, might even be offered eternal life, but ultimately mortality defined the human condition. The best a mortal could hope for was to live well, achieve fame that would outlast death, and receive proper burial and offerings. The Epic of Gilgamesh concludes with this acceptance. After failing to obtain immortality despite his heroic efforts, Gilgamesh returns to Uruk and accepts his mortal fate. He takes pride in the city's walls, in the legacy he will leave behind, finding meaning not in endless life, but in accomplishment and memory. Breathe in acceptance, breathe out striving, rest in the peace beyond ambition. Chapter 14. Wisdom, Literature and Divine Justice. Mesopotamian wisdom literature grapples with fundamental questions about suffering, justice, and the gods' relationship with humanity. These texts reveal a sophisticated philosophical and theological tradition that recognizes the ambiguity of existence and the limitations of divine justice. The Babylonian Theodicy, composed around 1000 BCE, presents a dialogue between a sufferer and his friend. The sufferer complains that despite living righteously, he experiences only hardship, while evildoers prosper. He questions whether the gods truly care about human virtue, or whether they have created a world where justice is meaningless. His friend attempts to defend the gods, arguing that divine wisdom surpasses human understanding, and that the sufferer must have committed some unknown sin to merit his afflictions. But the sufferer rejects this explanation, insisting on his innocence and pointing to the many wicked people who thrive. The poem ends ambiguously, with no clear resolution. The friend finally acknowledges that the gods created humanity with a capacity for wickedness, suggesting that injustice might be built into the very fabric of existence. The sufferer receives some assurance that prayer might help, but no guarantee of divine intervention. Let these ancient questions about meaning and suffering dissolve into the mystery of approaching sleep. Another text, sometimes called the Babylonian Job due to its similarities with the biblical book, describes a pious man named Shubshi-Meshri Shakan who falls into terrible affliction. Disease ravages his body, friends abandon him, and he loses all social standing. He cannot understand what he has done to deserve such punishment. The sufferer cries out, "What is good for oneself may be offence to one's God. What in one's own heart seems despicable may be proper to one's God. Who can know the will of the gods in heaven? Who can understand the plans of the underworld gods? Where have humans learned the way of a god?" Eventually, through continued prayer and the intervention of Marduk, the sufferer is healed and restored. Unlike the Theodicy, this text ends optimistically, affirming that persistent faith can move the gods to compassion. Yet it also acknowledges the inscrutability of divine will and the impossibility of fully understanding why suffering occurs. Proverbs and wisdom sayings offered more practical guidance for navigating life's challenges. Many of these focused on social relationships, proper behaviour, and managing expectations. Do not marry a prostitute whose husbands are legion, an Ishtar woman who is dedicated to a god, a courtesan whose favours are many. In your trouble she will not support you, in your dispute she will be a mocker. There is no reverence or submissiveness in her. Other proverbs counselled caution in speech. Do not speak treason, for it will be a trap for you. Do not say whatever comes to your mind even when you are alone, for what you say in secret will be proclaimed openly. The concept of Bel-Nemeki, Lord of Wisdom, referred to Enki and reflected the belief that true wisdom came from divine revelation rather than human reasoning alone. Yet the wisdom texts also demonstrated empirical observation and rational analysis, suggesting that the Mesopotamians valued both divine insight and human intelligence. Drift deeper now, beyond questions and answers, into the wisdom of rest itself. Chapter 15. Magic and Protection. The Mesopotamian world was populated by spiritual dangers, demons, ghosts, and malevolent forces that threatened health, prosperity, and life itself. An elaborate system of magic and protective rituals developed to ward off these threats. Demons were numerous and varied. Pazuzu, depicted with a dog-like face, scaly body, and eagle talons, was paradoxically invoked for protection despite his frightening appearance. Small bronze amulets of Pazuzu were worn or placed in homes, as he was believed to drive away Lamashtu, a terrible female demon who attacked pregnant women and infants. Lamashtu, daughter of the sky god Anu, left heaven to prey upon humanity. She was depicted with a lion's head, donkey's teeth, and bird talons, suckling a pig and a dog at her breasts. Her malevolence focused especially on vulnerable moments: pregnancy, childbirth, and early infancy. Amulets, incantations, and rituals sought to protect mothers and children from her attacks. The Asu, physician priests, employed both practical medical treatments and magical incantations. They understood disease as having multiple possible causes: natural bodily dysfunction, punishment from gods, or demonic attack. Treatment therefore required both physical remedies and spiritual interventions. Let protective symbols shimmer in your mind's eye as you slip towards safer realms of sleep. The Ashpu, exorcist priests, specialized in identifying and expelling evil spirits. They would diagnose which demon or divine punishment afflicted a sufferer, then prescribe appropriate rituals to remove the threat. These rituals might involve burnt offerings, water purification, incantations, and the creation of clay figures representing the demon, which would then be destroyed. Incantation series like the Maklu, meaning burning, were used against witchcraft. If someone believed they had been cursed by a witch or sorcerer, they would hire an Ashpu to perform the Maklu ritual, which involved burning figurines representing the witch while reciting incantations that would turn the curse back against its sender. The Bitrimki, House of the Washing, was a purification ritual that could last several days and involved elaborate procedures to cleanse someone from divine anger or demonic pollution. The sufferer would be washed with holy water, anointed with oils, fumigated with incense, and led through various symbolic actions designed to restore purity and divine favour. Protective amulets were ubiquitous in Mesopotamian society. Small cylinder seals, which served primarily as signatures and marks of ownership, also functioned as protective charms. The images carved on these seals often depicted guardian deities, mythological scenes, or symbolic animals believed to convey protection. Written amulets consisted of small clay tablets, or strips of silver inscribed with protective incantations. These might be worn on the body or placed in homes. A typical protective formula might read: Incantation, Shamash in the sky, Shamash on earth, Judge of heaven and earth. May the evil tongue, the evil eye, the evil lips, the evil speech, the evil word, the evil name, be far from my body. I adjure you by Shamash and Ea. Remove yourselves, stand aside. Incantation formula. Breathe in protection, breathe out all that would disturb your peace. Rest in safety. Chapter 16. Astronomy and Astrology. The Mesopotamians developed sophisticated astronomical observation and recording systems, tracking celestial phenomena with remarkable precision thousands of years before the telescope. Their motivations were both practical and religious. The heavens revealed the will of the gods. The Mulapin, a compendium of astronomical knowledge composed around 1000 BCE, catalogues stars, constellations, and the movements of celestial bodies. It describes the heliacal rising of various stars, the length of day and night throughout the year, and the paths of the sun, moon, and planets across the sky. The Mesopotamians identified the planets visible to the naked eye and associated them with specific deities. Jupiter was Marduk's star. Venus belonged to Ishtar. Mars was associated with Nergal, god of war and plague. Saturn belonged to Ninurta, the warrior god. Mercury was linked with Nabu, god of writing and wisdom. The movements of these celestial bodies were understood as divine communication. When planets appeared in unusual positions, formed conjunctions, or displayed other notable phenomena, these events were interpreted as omens indicating the gods' intentions. Let your mind expand into the vastness of the ancient night sky, where gods walked among the stars. The Enuma Anu Enlil, a massive series of at least 70 tablets, compiled thousands of celestial omens. A typical entry might read, "If Jupiter enters the centre of the moon, grain of the 4 quarters will be low in price, the land will be secure, the gods will assent to the prayers of the land." Another, "If Mars approaches Regulus, there will be death of a great one, destruction of the lord of the land, downfall of Akkad, plague, disappearance of cattle." These omens primarily concerned the welfare of the kingdom rather than individuals. The king employed court astronomers who watched the sky continuously, recording observations and consulting the omen series to interpret what they saw. If the omens were dire, rituals could be performed to avert the threatened catastrophe. The Mesopotamians developed the zodiac, dividing the ecliptic into 12 sections associated with constellations. Our modern zodiac derives from their system, though the Mesopotamian version differed in some details. They understood that the sun, moon, and planets moved through these constellations in predictable patterns. The discovery of mathematical patterns in celestial movements led to predictive astronomy. By the Seleucid period around 300 BCE, Babylonian astronomers could predict eclipses, planetary positions, and other phenomena with impressive accuracy. These calculations were based on centuries of careful observation and the development of sophisticated mathematical techniques. The week as a 7-day cycle derives from Mesopotamian tradition, with each day governed by one of the 7 celestial bodies visible to the naked eye: the Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. This astrological association persists in many modern languages. Monday is Moon Day, Saturday is Saturn's Day, and so on. Float among the stars like the ancient astronomers who watched the heavens for signs and messages. Chapter 17. The End of Anu's Kingdom. As centuries passed, the religious landscape of Mesopotamia evolved. The worship of the Anunnaki continued, but new empires brought new religious emphasis. The rise of Babylon elevated Marduk to supreme status, absorbing powers and attributes that had belonged to older gods. The Persians conquered Babylon in 539 BCE under Cyrus the Great. Though the Persians practiced Zoroastrianism, they showed tolerance for local religions, and the old temples continued to function. The Greek conquest by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE brought Hellenistic influences, and Greek deities began to be identified with Mesopotamian gods, Zeus with Marduk, Aphrodite with Ishtar. Gradually, the ancient traditions faded. By the early centuries of the Common Era, Christianity and other new religions had largely displaced the old gods. The temples fell into ruin, the cuneiform script was forgotten, and the myths of the Anunnaki survived only in fragmentary references in Greek and Roman texts. For over 1,000 years, the Anunnaki were forgotten by history. The great civilizations of Mesopotamia were known primarily through biblical references: the Tower of Babel, the cities of Ur and Nineveh, the empires of Assyria and Babylon. But the details of Mesopotamian religion and mythology were lost. Let yourself drift through this long forgetting, this sleep of cultures and gods. In the mid-19th century, archaeologists began excavating the tells, the massive earth mounds that dotted the Mesopotamian landscape. Beneath these mounds lay the remains of ancient cities. Archaeologists discovered palaces, temples, and thousands of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform writing. The decipherment of cuneiform, achieved in the 1840s and 1850s through the brilliant work of scholars like Henry Rawlinson, Edward Hincks, and Jules Oppert, opened a window into a lost world. The clay tablets could finally be read, revealing legal codes, business transactions, literary works, and religious texts. The Epic of Gilgamesh emerged from obscurity. George Smith, a young British museum assistant, was sorting through tablet fragments from Nineveh when he discovered portions of a flood narrative strikingly similar to the biblical story of Noah. His announcement in 1872 caused a sensation. Here was evidence of an older flood tradition that had influenced or paralleled the Genesis account. Subsequent discoveries and translations revealed the full scope of Mesopotamian literature and mythology. The names of gods once worshipped by millions came back to light: Anu, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Marduk. Their stories, preserved on clay tablets buried for 2,000 years, could be read again. Modern scholarship has painstakingly reconstructed the religious world of ancient Mesopotamia, though significant gaps remain. Many tablets are damaged or fragmentary. Some texts survive in multiple versions that contradict each other. The living context of ritual and belief transmitted orally and through practice rather than writing, is forever lost. Yet enough survives to glimpse the grandeur and complexity of Mesopotamian civilization, to understand something of how these ancient peoples conceived of the cosmos, the gods, and humanity's place in the divine order. Rest in this space between forgetting and remembering, where ancient voices whisper from clay and stone. Chapter 18. Modern Interpretations and Debates. Contemporary scholars approach the Anunnaki from various disciplinary perspectives, leading to rich but sometimes contradictory interpretations. Archaeologists focus on material evidence, temple architecture, votive objects, and settlement patterns. Philologists analyze linguistic structures and textual variations. Historians situate religious beliefs within broader social and political contexts. Some scholars emphasize the political dimensions of Mesopotamian religion. The elevation of particular gods often correlated with the political fortunes of their cities. When Babylon became the dominant power in Mesopotamia, Marduk's status rose correspondingly, as reflected in the Enuma Elish's portrayal of Marduk defeating Tiamat and reorganizing the cosmos. Religious developments thus reflected and reinforced political hierarchies. Kings who conquered new territories would bring the defeated city's god into a subordinate relationship with their patron deity, mirroring the political subjugation of one people to another. Other scholars focus on the psychological and anthropological dimensions of Mesopotamian religion. The gods embodied natural forces and human experiences, personifying aspects of reality that felt powerful, unpredictable, or mysterious. Understanding the gods' character and relationships helped people make sense of their world. Let these scholarly debates drift through your consciousness, like fragments of ancient tablets waiting to be pieced together. The feminist analysis of Mesopotamian religion has produced important insights about gender, power, and sexuality in ancient societies. Goddesses like Inanna, Ishtar held tremendous power, embodying female sexuality as divine and potent rather than shameful. Yet these same traditions also reflected patriarchal structures, with male gods typically holding higher authority. The figure of Inanna is particularly complex. She was a warrior who led armies, a goddess of erotic love who chose her own lovers, and a queen who descended to the underworld and returned transformed. Her myths explore themes of female power, desire, and the costs of transcendence. Environmental historians note how Mesopotamian religion reflected the precarious relationship between human civilization and the natural environment. In a region dependent on irrigation agriculture, where floods could be catastrophic and droughts deadly, gods of water and storms held special significance. The story of the flood can be read as processing the traumatic memory of actual catastrophic flooding in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. Archaeological evidence suggests that severe floods did occur in Mesopotamian prehistory, events that would have devastated communities and lived on in collective memory as demonstrations of divine power. Comparative mythology explores connections between Mesopotamian traditions and those of neighbouring cultures. The Hittites, Canaanites, Israelites, and other Near Eastern peoples shared narrative motifs, divine types, and religious concepts with Mesopotamia, suggesting a common cultural heritage in the region. The influence of Mesopotamian mythology on biblical texts remains a subject of scholarly investigation and debate. The flood narrative, creation accounts, and aspects of divine assembly imagery in the Hebrew Bible show clear connections to older Mesopotamian traditions, raising questions about cultural transmission and adaptation. Breathe in the richness of multiple perspectives. Breathe out the need for single definitive answers. Rest in complexity. Chapter 19. Legacy and Influence. The legacy of the Anunnaki extends far beyond ancient Mesopotamia. Elements of their mythology have been absorbed into later religious traditions, influence literary and artistic works, and continue to fascinate contemporary culture. Jewish traditions preserved in texts like 1 Enoch and the Book of Jubilees expanded on the Genesis account of the Watchers and Nephilim, creating elaborate angelology and demonology that drew from ancient Near Eastern sources. Early Christians inherited these traditions, and references to fallen angels and their offspring appear throughout early Christian literature. Islamic tradition also preserves stories of jinn and fallen angels that share thematic elements with both biblical and Mesopotamian sources. The Quran mentions beings created from fire who possess intelligence and free will, capable of both good and evil, occupying a status between angels and humans that echoes the liminal position of the Anunnaki's human creations. Medieval European literature absorbed these traditions through biblical and classical sources. References to giants, to ancient civilizations that possessed great knowledge, and to a golden age before a great catastrophe echo throughout medieval texts, from chronicles to romances to religious allegories. Let these threads of influence weave through your drifting thoughts like tapestries depicting ancient myths. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries showed renewed interest in ancient mythologies as Europeans began to see classical and Near Eastern civilizations with fresh eyes. Poets like Byron incorporated Mesopotamian themes into their work. The discovery and translation of Gilgamesh inspired new literary treatments of ancient themes. Modern fantasy literature owes significant debts to Mesopotamian mythology. The cosmic conflicts between divine forces, the ancient civilizations of great power and knowledge, the artifacts of divine origin that grant their possessors extraordinary abilities, these tropes that saturate contemporary fantasy derive in part from ancient Near Eastern sources. J.R.R. Tolkien, though he drew primarily from Norse and Celtic mythology, created a cosmology that shares structural elements with Mesopotamian tradition, a supreme creator deity, a pantheon of lesser divine beings who shape the world, beings who fall from grace and corrupt the created order, and ages of the world marked by catastrophic conflicts. The popularity of ancient astronaut theories in late 20th and early 21st century popular culture has brought the Anunnaki to widespread public attention, though in forms that academic scholars reject. Television programs, books, and internet discussions present speculative interpretations that blend ancient mythology with modern UFO beliefs, while mainstream scholarship dismisses these interpretations as pseudo-historical. They reflect enduring human fascination with the idea that ancient peoples possessed knowledge or experienced encounters that mainstream narratives cannot explain. The appeal of such theories may say more about contemporary anxieties and desires than about ancient history. Video games have discovered rich material in Mesopotamian mythology. Games like Assassin's Creed and Persona incorporate Sumerian and Babylonian deities and myths into their narratives, introducing new generations to these ancient stories, albeit in highly fictionalized forms. Float through these echoes and reinterpretations, these endless variations on ancient themes. Chapter 20. Mysteries that Remain. Despite more than a century and a half of archaeological and philological work, significant mysteries about the Anunnaki and Mesopotamian civilization remain unsolved or contested. The origins of the Sumerians themselves remain unclear. They appear in the archaeological record rather suddenly, bringing sophisticated culture and technology. Their language shows no clear relationship to any known language family, isolating them linguistically from their neighbours. Various theories about their origins have been proposed, from migration from the east to local development from earlier cultures, but no consensus has emerged. The purpose and meaning of certain ritual practices remain opaque. What exactly happened during the sacred marriage ceremony, where the king ritually consummated union with the goddess Inanna? Texts describe the ritual but leave crucial details ambiguous. Was this symbolic theatre, or did something more literal occur with a priestess representing the goddess? The precise relationship between the Sumerian and Akkadian traditions puzzles scholars. The Akkadians, a Semitic people, lived alongside the Sumerians and eventually became politically dominant. They adopted much of Sumerian religion, but also brought their own traditions. Distinguishing original Sumerian beliefs from Akkadian adaptations and synthesizing later developments challenges scholars. Let these unsolved mysteries drift through your mind like questions dissolving into dreams. The function of certain architectural features in temples and ziggurats remains debated. Secret chambers, hidden staircases, and unusual structural elements have been discovered but not fully explained. Were these practical features, ritual spaces, or something else? The extent to which ordinary people participated in temple religion versus elite practice is difficult to determine. Most texts come from temple and palace contexts, revealing official religion but leaving popular practice shadowy. Archaeological evidence of household shrines and amulets suggests robust popular religion, but its specific forms and beliefs are hard to reconstruct. The relationship between written texts and oral traditions poses fundamental questions. The myths preserved on tablets represent only a fraction of Mesopotamian tradition. How much was transmitted orally and never written down? How faithfully do the written versions reflect living traditions? These questions can never be fully answered. The meaning of certain symbolic motifs appearing repeatedly in Mesopotamian art remains mysterious. The so-called handbag, carried by various divine and priestly figures, appears across millennia of Mesopotamian art, yet its significance is unclear. Similarly, the precise meaning of many cylinder seal images defies certain interpretation. Some tablets remain untranslated or poorly understood. Sumerian grammar is complex, and certain vocabulary items appear only once or twice in the entire corpus, making translation uncertain. Akkadian is better understood, but even here, ambiguities and gaps persist. The ultimate question, perhaps unanswerable by historical methods, is what truth lies behind the myths. Were the Anunnaki purely imaginative constructs, personifications of natural forces and social relationships? Did they represent distorted memories of actual historical figures or events? Were they, as some believe, actual non-human intelligences that interacted with ancient peoples? Academic scholarship approaches such questions with methodological naturalism, seeking explanations within the framework of known historical and cultural processes, but the texts themselves assert the reality of divine beings and their direct intervention in human affairs, a claim that cannot be verified or falsified by historical methods. Rest in the space of mystery, where questions lead not to answers but to deeper questions, where certainty dissolves into wonder. Chapter 21. The Sacred and the Profane. Mesopotamian civilization did not sharply distinguish between sacred and secular realms in the way later cultures would. Religion permeated every aspect of life: political authority, economic activity, legal proceedings, agricultural practices, and personal relationships. Every economic transaction invoked divine witness. Contracts ended with formulas like by Shamash and Marduk, to invoke these gods as guarantors of the agreement. Breaking a contract was not merely a social or legal violation, but an offence against the divine order. Law codes like that of Hammurabi opened with lengthy prologues describing how the gods had chosen the king to establish justice. The laws themselves were presented as divinely sanctioned, and the stone stele on which they were inscribed showed Hammurabi receiving the symbols of authority from Shamash, god of justice. Agricultural work followed religious calendars. Planting, irrigation, and harvest occurred according to schedules determined by priests observing celestial and seasonal signs. Farmers made offerings to ensure fertility and protection from pests, storms, and drought. Even commercial activities like brewing beer, one of Mesopotamia's major industries, involved religious dimensions. Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, was honoured in hymns describing the brewing process in sacred and erotic terms. Tavern keepers, often women, operated under religious and legal regulations that connected their economic activity to the cosmic order. Let the boundaries between sacred and ordinary dissolve as you drift deeper into rest. Personal names reflected religious devotion and hopes for divine protection. Names like Enlil is my shepherd or Marduk is my light declared loyalty to particular deities. Parents named children to invoke divine blessing or commemorate religious experiences. Marriage involved religious ceremonies and invocations. Wedding contracts called upon gods to witness and bless the union. Hymns to Inanna celebrated sexual love as a sacred force, and erotic poetry employed religious language to describe human intimacy. Death and burial were thoroughly ritualized, with proper rites essential for the deceased's welfare in the afterlife. Grave goods provided the dead with tools and provisions for their journey. Regular offerings kept the dead nourished and prevented them from becoming dangerous ghosts. The sacred permeated the landscape itself. Mountains, rivers, and springs were associated with specific deities. Certain locations were understood as especially holy, places where the boundary between divine and mortal realms grew thin. Pilgrimages to these sites allowed people to access divine power more directly. Dreams were understood as one of the primary ways gods communicated with humans. People slept in temples seeking prophetic dreams. Dream interpreters, skilled in reading divine messages, held important social positions. A person's dreams were taken seriously as potential revelations of divine will or warnings of future events. The Mesopotamian worldview recognized no purely natural events. Everything that happened reflected divine intention or demonic activity. a storm was not merely meteorological phenomenon, but the action of storm gods. Disease resulted from angry deities or attacking demons. Military victory demonstrated that the gods favoured one side over the other. This pervasive religious understanding provided a framework for making sense of an unpredictable and often harsh world. When suffering occurred, when crops failed, when enemies attacked, the religious system offered explanations and remedies. One could appeal to the gods, perform rituals to remove pollution, make offerings to restore divine favour, breathe in the sacred nature of all existence, breathe out the division between holy and ordinary, rest in unity. Chapter 22. Time, Eternity, and Cosmic Cycles. Mesopotamian conceptions of time differed from modern linear understandings. While historical events were recorded chronologically, deeper patterns of eternal recurrence shaped how the Mesopotamians understood reality. The day unfolded according to the movements of Shamash, the sun god, who journeyed across the sky during the day and through the underworld at night. His daily course was both natural phenomenon and divine action, time marked by the god's eternal journey. The lunar month, governed by Nana Sin, the moon god, provided the basic calendar unit. The new moon marked the beginning of each month, and religious festivals clustered around specific lunar phases. The full moon, when the moon god reached his greatest brightness, held special sacred significance. The year followed agricultural cycles, seasons of planting and harvest, flood and drought, growth and dormancy. These patterns repeated eternally, each year reenacting the primordial creation and renewal of cosmic order. The New Year festival, celebrated in spring when new life emerged from winter dormancy, ritually recreated creation itself. The recitation of the Enuma Elish reminded participants that the world emerged from chaos through divine conflict, and that this order required constant renewal and maintenance. Let your sense of linear time dissolve into cycles of eternal return, where beginnings and endings merge. Longer cycles organised historical understanding. The Sumerian king list divided history into antediluvian and post-diluvian periods, separated by the catastrophic flood. This periodization reflected a belief that history itself had fundamental ruptures, moments when the divine order had to be re-established on new foundations. Yet within these grand cycles, smaller patterns repeated. Dynasties rose and fell, cities gained and lost dominance, kings succeeded one another in endless procession. The gods remained constant even as human kingdoms transformed. The concept of eternity in Mesopotamian thought did not mean timelessness, but rather endless time, the perpetual continuation of cyclical patterns. The gods were eternal, not because they existed outside time, but because they endured through all time, unchanging amidst constant change. Humans, by contrast, were defined by mortality and temporality. An individual's life was a brief flash in the eternal cycles, a moment of consciousness in the vast sweep of cosmic time. Yet human actions could have lasting significance. Building temples, establishing laws, composing great works of literature allowed humans to participate in something beyond their individual mortality. Gilgamesh's epic expresses this poignantly. Failing to achieve personal immortality, he finds meaning in his accomplishments. The walls of Uruk, his deeds of heroism, his wisdom gained through suffering. These create a legacy that transcends death. The Mesopotamian approach to time shaped how they recorded history. Royal inscriptions focused on building projects and military campaigns, the lasting accomplishments rather than transient events. The present moment mattered primarily as it connected to eternal patterns and contributed to enduring achievements. Astronomical observation reinforced cyclical time understanding. The predictable movements of celestial bodies, repeating in precise patterns, demonstrated that the cosmos operated according to unchanging divine laws. Eclipses, planetary movements, and stellar positions followed cycles that ancient astronomers learned to calculate and predict. Yet Mesopotamians also recognized historical change and development. They preserved lists of ancient kings and noted differences between past and present. They recorded conquests and catastrophes as unique events, not merely instances of repeating patterns. This tension between cyclical and linear time, between eternal recurrence and historical change, created a rich temporal framework. Each moment participated in both the specific, unrepeatable flow of events and the eternal patterns that gave those events meaning. Rest in this eternal now, where past and future dissolve, where the cycles turn without beginning or end, where time itself becomes timeless. Chapter 23. The Voice of the Tablets. Listen now to the actual words preserved on ancient clay, the voices of those who worshipped the Anunnaki thousands of years ago. These are not scholars' descriptions, but the prayers, hymns, and laments of ancient devotees. A hymn to Nana, the moon god, from the city of Ur. Father Nana, Lord of Ur, Great Lord, Light of the great heaven, Father of the bright one who illuminates the dark, who makes the light shine in the sacred Ekishnugal, Pillar of heaven and earth, Mighty one whose command is foremost, Determiner of destinies, your divine plans cannot be overturned. Feel the reverence, the awe, the complete dependence on divine power that these words express. A lament for the destruction of Ur after invasion and conquest. On that day, the storm ordered by Enlil in hate, the storm that wears away the land, covered Ur like a cloth. On that day, the storm that annihilates the land set up its mouth like a fire. Because of the storm, the city became empty places, destroyed. O Father Nana, that city has been made into ruins. The people moan. The goddess Ningal herself laments the destruction. That day, I truly lied, not down in fear on my couch. I lay down upon my bed. Bitter is the pain in my heart. The tears I shall shed will flow like the Euphrates. To whom shall I speak? He will not change his command. The matter is beyond my strength. My city, built as a city, yet turned back to a tell. I, its queen, like a flying bird, have left my city. Let these ancient sorrows wash over you, grief transcending millennia. A prayer of an ordinary person to their personal god. My God, the day shines bright over the land, but for me the day is black. The bright day has become for me like darkness. I have wept, tortured over this, through the day of sunrise and the day of cloudburst. I am troubled, I go forward, but I do not know the way. The sufferer continues. My God, you who are my Father who begot me, lift up my face. Like a pure cow, look kindly on my supplication. How long will you neglect me, leave me unprotected? I am like a cow without a herder, without someone to guide me. Feel the universal human experience in these ancient words. Suffering, confusion, the desperate hope for divine intervention. A love song, possibly used in sacred marriage ceremonies, celebrating Inanna. Inanna, sweet as honey, placed her leg on the king's thigh. Dumuzi spoke to her tenderly. I will go with you to my garden. I will go with you to my orchard. I will go with you to my apple tree. Honey sweet, release me. A hymn celebrating Enki's creative power. When Enki rose up, the fish rose up in the deep and bowed before the Lord. The carp rose up in the deep and bowed before Enki. He stood up and brought order. He laid out marshes and cane brakes, the sea creatures, the fish, and the green sea.